Hello, we're here with Captain Troy Handsome and SugarCoatedMoth to talk about TTRPGs in general and world building stuff.
Hello, happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm also happy to be here.
Before we get into it, did y'all want to tell me how you like to be called and what pronouns you use?
Uh,
Um,
yeah, I guess I'll go since I'm on the left side of this
okay.
screen. I typically go left to right. Hi, my name is Captain Troy Handsome of International Rescue. Please state the nature of your emergency. I go by either Captain or Troy, and my pronouns are he, him, but any pronouns work fine for me.
I am Morse. I go by SugarCoatedMoth on the internet, so I can also go by Moth. I don't really care. And I use he, they pronouns.
Yay, thank you so much. I just changed my thing from off of push to talk because I was just like, oh, I should probably not have that in case I forget. Okay, so I wanted to ask both of you, how long have you both been doing TTRPGs, and what system have you first started with? I guess Captain.
Oh yes, I'll go first. Thanks for. I wasn't sure. It's the whole. Should I introduce myself first?
Yeah.
Oh, actually, I completely forgot. I know we talked a little bit before, but I forgot that I actually started with a TTRPG called Shadowrun. It's like a futuristic, think cyberpunk. They have their own video games. I did that in 2019, about like 4 years ago, and I had no idea what I was doing. It was kind of hard to tell what was going on because there wasn't really much of a map to look at, and it was my first time basically doing role playing in person. But though that kind of phase I forget about, because what I was gonna say was I started with D&D in early 2020, right before the pandemic started. So that's
Oh.
the one like in my heart that I know I started with, but I sometimes remember Shadowrun exists.
You can't go reminding me that 2019 was 4 years ago.
The funny thing is,
That is
I
my
was
bad.
I was just thinking that. I was just like, it was 4 years ago, not last year.
Oh, that's wild. Um, but I started like 3 years ago, with a pretty heavily modified D&D 5e system. Um, Because when I first started, it was like with a bunch of people who didn't really know what they were doing, and a DM that also didn't really know what they were doing. So we kind of like cut a bunch of mechanics to like add in later when we learned more, which is actually I think a good way to like learn what you're doing. Um, it's like simplifying it, like learning as you go.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's true. So, whenever you're doing stuff, maybe the first times you don't have to particularly, or even if you did know it, you don't particularly have to be strictly locked into the thing. You could just do whatever works best for you and your players.
Yeah. Um, I treat systems less like strict rule sets and more just like, oh hell yeah, I can break this into whatever I want it to be. Um, and some systems are easier to break into some things that others just like don't really work for. Um, so you could run a horror thing with D&D 5e, but since that's pretty heavily combat focused, Call of Cthulhu is probably going to work a little bit better for that, because it'll have more things for like sanity and mechanics for that sort of thing that you won't have to build from scratch.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yes, that's a
Um,
really good point because a lot of people like don't get me wrong, I love D&D 5e, but as far as the tenets of TTRPGs go, you might want to pick a system that works a little bit better for what you're going for, whether you want to focus on the role playing like in Vampire the Masquerade or if you want a more focus on combat. I forget what the third facet is, but it's like role playing, combat, probably like lore or world building or something. But sometimes you
Yeah.
want to, once you familiarize yourself with TTRPGs in general, shop around, familiarize with, check out other places.
oh yeah, that's true. Speaking of world building and stuff, you've both been DMs, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Hmm.
Um, I think Moth, you usually are a DM. Have you been a player before?
I've been a player once
Okay.
for like a day. I'm not experienced in like being an actual player. I prefer to be a DM.
Okay, so when both of y'all do the start to, you say you want to do a new campaign, what would the process be for you whenever you're thinking of the building? If it's like from scratch, or do you usually use some sort of how do you say pre-built campaign? I guess Captain.
For
Oh, no, no.
Actually,
go
I'll
ahead.
defer to
Go
Morse for
ahead.
this one. Actually,
Mhm.
no, since you're a lot more
Um,
familiar.
well, for me, it does depend on which system that I'm working within. Like I for D&D 5e, I've done a lot more world building with one specific world. And so I'm like, oh, well, I've already got all this preset lore. I can just like mess around in like different areas of this world and like do whatever I want with that. Have like more overarching stories because I don't typically do one shots in D&D 5e. Um, Partially because I feel like it's a lot less conducive to that. You like have to get more invested in the characters in order to like do things with that. Like if I'm doing a Call of Cthulhu one shot, which I really like to do, those are really fun.
Nice.
Um, it's those are typically built more like our world. Like you can have it like the 1920s America or something, and that won't feel like out of place. And so that makes it easier. But then you also have to mess with the lore of your own like eldritch deities and things, which is fun. I love doing that.
Nice.
Ooh, that
Um,
sounds so interesting.
Yeah, Laura's great.
I don't typically work with the more historical stuff because, you know, after the like fourth time you get your 1920s mob boss disemboweled by a fish man, it just kind of gets boring. Um, so I prefer like Y2K era for my
Mm.
worlds and that. Y2K or like early 2000s. I think it's fun. Um, also because in that time there was a lot of like unrest in the world that you can kind of manipulate with whatever monster of the week.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. So,
So you don't have to really do that much world building if you're just like, oh yeah, I can just steal from history.
Exactly. So much of DMing come is deriving things from perhaps fiction or media that you consume, just in like little pieces. Hopefully, ones your players might not be familiar with, or in a way that they don't notice.
that's true. And that's a good point, is like having the environment and the story sort of meld together to make something really interesting and have the themes mesh together in that way too.
Yeah, and like even if it's taking something that your players will know and messing with it, I find that that can also be a really effective spot for horror. Like, one of my favorite one shots that I've written is like set again early 2000s, which is where a lot of people that I know were kids in, so there's already like a lot of nostalgia there. Um, and so you can take that and you can twist it into something that's like, well, I kind of hate in horror the trope of like, oh, childhood thing is now evil.
Oh
But like
yeah.
my favorite one shot that I've written is one where people like leave and go to a place and like nothing happens until they get back and they realize that like there are no people left.
Oh.
Ooh, that's spooky.
And then you're just like in this place that is already intimately familiar to you because you kind of grew up there. It's just fundamentally wrong because there's no people.
That is spooky. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I like that too because
A
it's not
lot.
full on spooky. It's just like enough for you to know it's like unsettling. You feel it in the back of your mind, in the back of your heart. Like something is a little off.
Where'd all the
Wowzer.
people go? Who knows?
I'm sure they're fine.
So then, Troy, I wanted to ask
Mhm.
how the process would be for you then whenever you think
Ah,
about starting a new campaign. Yeah, that's what it's called.
uh-huh. Yes. Okay. So typically, how it happens for me is I'll have a group of like friends or people, or maybe like I have one friend who has a bunch of other friends who are thinking, "Oh, I've heard of D&D for whatever reason." You know, they've watched Stranger Things, they've seen, they've heard about this thing called like Critical Role, or they've seen on Amazon Prime Video. There's this wonderful D&D show, like a little cartoon that they might have watched, and they'll be like, "Well, um, I don't know how to get started." And that's typically where I will step in and say, "Well, we can run." So I guess on the reverse, I believe I've run a lot of D&D 5e one shots. I'll at least run a one shot for them to kind of dip their toes in the water, introduce them to things. So I'll say, you know, I'll help you make your characters, or maybe I'll have someone more experienced with me who will also help, because many hands make light work. And when there's a lot of players fielding questions, especially for me, when I play a lot of D&D or TTRPGs in general online, it's a little trickier. As a brief segue, nothing hits like in-person TTRPGs, because as much as I run it online, there's something special about being at the table physically with people, but also being able to whisper to each other, to kind of like elbow or josh each other for like these little situations, side conversations. It makes it feel pretty real. As far as digital and online goes, the best that I can do is maybe I'll message, because I have individual Discord channels in my server for my players. So I might
Oh,
message them something in secret, or just DM them directly if we don't have that set up, and they can DM each other, and it gets some of that, but not the full magic is there. So that would be nice to introduce people to in that setting. But until then, I try to introduce them digitally. I'll take existing content. And to answer the primary focus of your question, honestly, a lot of the main D&D content that is put out there, I'll admit, is problematic in various ways, whether it's like socially problematic or mechanically problematic. And that's why um, world building and homebrewing is so appealing, because you can take stuff that is just okay, or even not very good, or maybe even just a little bit good, and make it better. Again, like we mentioned earlier, you know, adjust it to your players, cater to your players, but also just take out things that you think, you know, problematic situations. Um, just make it better in all sorts of ways. Because I started with a lot of pre-made content, because that's what a lot of the DMs back in 2020 would run for me. You know, they were also dipping into D&D for the first time. We're all learning together. So they're running stuff, and a lot of it is pretty combat oriented. And not that there's anything wrong with combat oriented TTRPGs in general, but there's something special about the specific interaction you have with your characters, instead of like going through and, you know, I could play a video game if I want to run my character through like as a meat stick, you know, just slashing down enemies with no questioning or no cause, no reason or rhyme. But then I started taking this existing content where you're automatically supposed to fight these enemies because they're quote unquote evil, or because they don't speak the same language as you. I let them speak the same language. I gave them their own, you know, desires. Like maybe they've been pillaging because of this reason or that reason. And again, there's nothing wrong with people who want to, because the people in 2020 who I no longer play with, when I went back to try to DM for them, I realized I wasn't having as much fun, but that's because they were looking at it like numbers. They're like, "Oh, I want to defeat this orc, 5 orcs. I'm going to use this special finisher combo." Whereas I've really grown to love the interactions and the memories that you make with your other players when you're figuring out a mystery together, finding out what happened to all the townspeople, or you know, saving it from the dragon, and you make fast friends with the mayor, who might have been your antagonist at first because they have like lots of high taxes or tariffs, or because they put you in jail that one time. But then you work together to defeat the common goal. It's the kind of thing that we see a lot in media.
yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally agree with that
Um,
one.
I completely agree with you. I like again, there's nothing wrong with combat heavy D&D stuff, but like I don't particularly like it because
Hmm.
where I get most of my enjoyment as a DM, like watching players get to like roleplay with each other and get to like figure out what they want to do. Um, and for like that's part of why I like running Call of Cthulhu because it's a lot less combat focused. Like,
Yes.
it can be combat, but like you really shouldn't, because you're always going to be a lot weaker than whatever you're fighting. And so it forces the players to be a lot more creative, and then you just get to sit there and watch. Um, like another thing with like being in person, what I really like to do is when I'm in person, I like to get everyone to like dress up, or like I'll make props and things that they get to
Oh,
physically inspect
I love
and like
that.
Ooh.
examine.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, like it's a fun time. I'll try to like make food that's like important to like whatever they're doing. Like one thing that I did for one campaign, or like not really campaign, but one shot was specifically there was supposed to be a like banquet thing and like a haunted house thing. It's a lot to explain. But like banquet with a bunch of ghosts. And there was this one room that they were supposed to try to be like getting into. Um, and I baked the key into a loaf of bread,
Whoa.
and then as they were eating the food, they got to just find it.
Oh my gosh. That's
And
really
that's
neat.
just an example of
I really
fun
like
things
that.
that you can do in person.
Oh my gosh. That I want to play in those. That sounds great.
Wow, that's really cool. Speaking of creativity, there's always this hard part of world building or a campaign where you probably have an idea, but then your players sort of go another direction you don't expect. Do you find that happens a lot? And if so, how do you sort of deal with, like, sort of form the campaign so that both sides still get that enjoyment?
I'd like to go second for this one again too, because I feel like since this does involve the world building, and I do run a lot of pre-built stuff, I'd like to go second for this one.
Okay. What's
Um, so what I try to do to help kind of like curb that is for my one shots, I have everything in like pretty contained settings. Or like, sure, there's a lot of exploring and like a lot of different pathways that you can go through, but like you do kind of need to go through everything in order to progress things and get to the potential solutions to whatever problem that you're having.
Mhm.
And you can also just like try to set up like an engaging mystery that your players just want to go figure out instead of like, I'm gonna get a gun and shoot the alien. Um, which is fine. Because also, if you do that, it probably won't end well for you. Just,
That's
yeah.
true.
Um, like, you know, it's a lot more engaging for people to be like, okay, why is the alien here, and what can we do about it? What can we do about like whatever's going on? Um, and even then, if they're kind of ignoring it, you can always just kind of like fudge some things and move around where the plot is happening.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. It reminds me of there's a TTRPG trope. I forget what it's called, like the Oni in two rooms. It's basically give your players two. I'm not saying I do this, but if you give your players two paths, they'll say, should we take path A or path B? Well, we'll try to avoid the Oni or the orc that we're trying to not fight.
Mhm.
So maybe they'll go to path B. Now, while it originally was on path A, you can just move it over to path B. Again, I'm not saying I do this, but it is an option that some DMs to do, especially if the encounter is important, which is another reason why I like the narratively focused campaigns. Why Call of Cthulhu sounds really nice to me, because sometimes in D&D it does get bogged down with fights that does this really is this important? I mean, I'm not saying every fight needs to push the story along, but it's nice when the players are engaged. They're having fun with the fight. But
Mhm.
to get back to what I was segueing away from was sometimes there are, when it comes to the smaller things, when players approach a situation in a different way than I'm expecting. It's cool as long as it's within the boundaries of everyone at the table. You know, there's like a villain there. Perhaps shouldn't pull the gun out, right? You know, that's a little extreme. We're not going to be, the quintessential term, a murder hobo. We're not going to try to approach this socially first. Maybe we'll come to toughs later, but are you really going to open with that outside the gate? So hopefully all your players are on the same page. Hopefully there's not one that doesn't mesh with at least your own style as a DM, because I will admit the players who want to like resort to violence immediately, ready to get in combat, might not necessarily be the players that I'm the best DM for. We all have different styles. We all have different campaigns that we like to run. So if you want something more story focused, more mystery focused, you know, just find the right DM for you. And when my players that I've been running campaigns for a while, when they come up with something that's unconventional, usually it within the boundaries of the players, it's hilarious and it's something I'm not expecting. They do say players keep DMs on their toes at all times.
Ah, that's a good saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just gonna say that I do like both of your points. They're really good. I brain farted.
Alright,
Go ahead.
What I typically like to do on that vein also is Call of Cthulhu lets you have a lot of like existential threats.
Ooh.
Like even if your players try running away from them, it's like it's already kind of okay, this is hard to explain, but like along the lines of what I run, like say for the one where like you come back to town and there's literally nobody there. The threat is already in your head, and if you leave, there's still going to be nobody in the world to run from or like
Oh.
run to. And then what you try going to grocery store to like get food so you don't starve in the peopleless wasteland, and bam, there's a dude crucified in front of an H Mart.
Oh my god.
What are you gonna do? Just leave him there?
So actually, I have to ask. I assume this happened. So, did your players leave them there? Could I ask what happened to the person crucified in front of the H Mart?
They did not leave him there.
Okay, okay, that's good.
They thought about it.
Right, it's a consideration.
That's spooky. Maybe we just go away.
Yeah, but like they knew that even if they went away, like what are you gonna do? He's still gonna be there. That's still the only person that you've seen. You have like no other threads to follow.
Mm-hmm.
That's exciting. I can see why your Call of Cthulhu content is a lot of. It's fun to be on whether I'm an audience member or a player. That sounds pretty nice.
Speaking of,
well,
I work hard on them.
Yeah,
Nice.
they sound really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What was I gonna say? Okay, speaking of audience, have y'all ever had sort of spectators to your scenarios, like people who wanted to watch y'all do a session? Whoever wants to go first, I feels comfy.
I guess I'll probably jump in this time since I keep throwing the ball over in that direction and saying, "Oh, I'll go after." So I do. I actually do stream some of my sessions. But most of my sessions I don't stream. I riddle my week with sessions, and I think there's pros and cons because, for example, my favorite campaign to run is actually Curse of Strahd. It's the quintessential vampire campaign, but heavily modified because base Curse of Strahd do not run. It's terrible. It's problematic. It's all sorts of don't run, but you want to adjust it, and a lot of DMs share my sentiments there. So not only do I run Curse of Strahd, but in classic, I guess, villainous fashion, I also run Strahd as a woman because I think there are avenues there that are explorable, that are much more exciting. And as far as role playing goes, I actually do personally prefer to role play as a woman when it comes to D&D and TTRPGs in general. So it's a lot easier for me to run Strahd in that fashion, and my players really enjoy that aspect. But it's also personal enough that I don't stream that campaign. It's important to me. It means a lot to me. It's important to them, and that's not the kind of thing that I necessarily, because a lot of D&D, a lot of TTRPGs are a private affair, and that's fine. You know, you're role playing. A lot of people work through perhaps issues of their own that they might have with the safe space that TTRPGs are. So it's only a select group of people, a select group of players that I actually stream, so that we can kind of put on that kind of show for people, and also the fashion kind of following in the footsteps of popular TTRPG podcasts or Twitch streams or shows on like streaming services.
Yeah.
I have personally never streamed anything or like had any form of audience for any TTRPG thing. Not for like any particular reason. I just haven't. I think I'd be fine with it. Um, just like I like telling stories.
Mm-hmm.
And like I don't know, I think it's fun for people to like see that sort of
Yeah.
thing. Just don't really stream.
Yeah, that's
Like
understandable.
literally
Yeah.
the Hangover a Corpse stream with you, Lux, was the first time that I'd ever been on a stream.
Oh, really? That's
Yeah.
okay. I myself am pretty new at this. This is my first time doing just a straight up talk show, actually, with anyone. And
Oh.
yeah, the other times I was just sort of doing stuff, like in Trinkets. And when I first had Morsan, we were playing Fawning Over a Corpse, and I was making the tutorial thingy, but this is the first time we're doing anything, just sitting down, hearing everyone's thoughts on this. And Morris, I think you'd be really excellent. Like, just me and Captain are like really like interested in your campaigns. They sound great.
Well, if you
Yeah,
ever want me
exactly.
to run one, I'd I'd be very down.
Oh,
I love running all of Cthulhu one shots, and I think that they could probably work online. I just have
ooh.
to draw some stuff up.
Well,
Um,
I am not opposed to that.
Yeah, based on the stories that you've been telling, you sound like you've really. I like your stride as a DM, and whatever content you're running, it sounds pretty exciting. The fact that you can come up, the fact that you have these stories to tell us, right? These little excerpts from your one shots, your campaigns, your sessions. I think that's a good sign because, like you said, you like storytelling. I think TTRPGs are basically collaborative storytelling, and it's kind of like it's the kind of story that shows up if I interact with people in real life. My brain will tell me, "Oh, this is just like that time in that campaign you ran on the pirate ship, right?" And
Yeah.
but not everyone has played D&D, so that's the kind of thing that I have to give a lot more context for. But the stories are just fun memories that we love to share with each other.
Yeah. Oh, that's
yeah,
sweet. Max says they'd love to watch one of your campaign. Ah,
I I would love to share them, honestly. Most of mine are optimized for like 4 or 5 players, but like if I was able to, I would be able to like move them to less. Also, a thing about that is I always pre-write my characters for one shots.
mm.
Um, would would that be okay?
Oh, I would love to play one of the characters that you pre-written. No, because basically you've got this like one shot, right? You've got the setting where stepping into that role. It's kind of like some board games that are out there, kind of like Betrayal at House on the Hill, one of my favorite board
Fucking
games.
love Betrayal House on the Hill.
Exactly. It's the same thing. This like the similar vibes. You're like exploring tile by tile. You're with a group of people. There might be some combat involved. There's a lot of role playing. You're playing as characters that are pre-made. So I definitely love to play one of your characters.
Yeah. Um, I I love board games. And a giant board
Me
game
too.
nerd.
If you all ever want to do
I'm not gonna
tabletop
start
simulator,
on the tyrant because I will just derail this to talk about games.
I feel
Yeah, I'd
that.
love that with both of y'all. That'd be so 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 fun. And speaking of playing as characters, there's so many RPG games out there where you do take the role as a character, such as in The Witcher you play as Geralt, but you could sort of still form him to be yourself with the choices you make.
Mm.
Like
Yeah, and
go ahead.
yeah, specifically why I like pre-writing characters is like, when I get to pre-write them, I get to pre-write their backstory and things, and that the player themselves picks the character without knowing that. Then they
Oh.
get to keep that to themselves and decide what they want to share with other players. With me still knowing how everything ties into the overall story.
Ooh, that's so cool.
I like people keeping secrets. That's
Oh,
another reason I
absolutely.
really like the Twilight House on the Hill. I really like social deduction games. I like games where people lie to each other.
Okay, speaking of lying, do y'all have a favorite moment of keeping one thing secret between either you and all the players, or you and like one player has to keep it from the others?
Uh, like, I
Ooh.
do.
Okay. I like
So
to go after you. This is exciting. I'm excited to hear it.
there was this one campaign that I was playing, or like DMing, not playing, but like running for people. Um, and it was like probably not my best one that I'd written, but I had it so that one of the characters was an entomologist.
Hmm.
Um, so they inherently knew a lot more about the big bad creature because it kind of took the form of like beetles, but not like in actual physical beetles, but like modifying human bodies into like gaining traits of those for like its followers and things. So that entomologist wanted to become one of the followers and become more bug-like, but didn't tell the other group because then they'd be ostracized and unable to get closer to that group. Um,
Oh.
it was just really fun seeing like the differing motivations and how that got played out by the rest of the group. And just I like bugs and body horror and yeah.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
Nice.
I don't
Yeah,
know if I was explaining it well, but
Yeah, you do.
yeah, I got you. If I'm understanding correctly, I probably would have been a player who, if I somehow found that out, I probably would have encouraged that player. I probably wouldn't ostracize. I mean, I don't know what running pre-made characters. Maybe I wouldn't. You're right. That's pretty exciting.
Max says funning over a course makes more sense after hearing that.
uh, yeah. Horror is one of my favorite genres to like tell stories in or like consume. I really like horror and I really like being able to implement horror elements into things. And like it's great because then I get to take all my favorite horror things and make everyone else look at them.
Yeah. Okay, Captain, do you have your answer?
Yes, I'd like to say two stories actually. The first one, basically what had happened. This was one of the earlier campaigns I was running. The rogue player and the bard elf found themselves in a room with a succubus who had the ability to shapeshift. Now, the rest of the party, they were able to easily determine whether it was because of my role playing or lack of experience thereof, or because they rolled really high on some insight checks. They're able to tell, oh, we don't trust this lady at all. We're down in this dungeon. It's like 2 floors down. she's been here this whole time. Like something's off. So what happens is the rogue and the rogue player and the bard, I think I pull them into a separate Discord channel so that we can figure out what's going on in here. So the rogue uses disguise self, the spell, to look like the succubus and runs out of the door and bolts and flees. Whereas the rest of the party, they see what they think is the succubus leaving the room, and so they chase after her. One of the players actually even uses one of his special teleporting abilities to get closer and just knock the rogue in disguise to the ground. Now, the bard has exited the room and is watching this unfold and is the only member of the party, not counting the rogue himself disguised as the succubus, who knows who that actually is. So as this Echo Knight is just about to like stab that player through, the bard is like chewing on their fingernails, their teeth are chattering. They're like, oh, wait, don't. And they're like, what's going on? This whole time the succubus is escaping after this distraction goes off successfully.
Oh my gosh.
So that's something that it helps to have that extra Discord room. Or if you're in person, that's the classic time to like, you pull the players away for a moment, or you hand them those little slips of paper that I hear a lot of people do in real life TTRPGs to kind of, it's like, this is what you know. The other players don't know this, but this is what you know.
Wow.
The other story I wanted to talk about, which was less players individually not knowing, but more all of them not knowing, is actually Curse of Strahd. So typically, because people run it as is, or with a few little tweaks here and there, everyone assumes this like Dracula looking guy is gonna show up and do things. So they get through, it feels like, half the campaign hearing about Strahd and all this stuff, and then they arrive at this church. And there at the church is this beautiful lady with long black hair at the altar, waiting for them, giving the classic villain monologue, which she was only able to get off because I had two players show up. One saw this and was like, I'm getting out of here. But the other one like failed some save to escape, like a hold person spell or something. So we're stuck there. So I could get the monologue off. It's the classic, the DM wants to get the monologue off. Like some players will just shoot the bad guy right away, but some players will let the bad guy, do the talking. So that was the first time they met her, and they're like, "Wait a minute, you're Strahd? But this whole time, we thought you were some dude." So that's one of my favorite moments. The only problem with that is I have another campaign where I do the same thing, but they actually haven't met her yet. So I have to make sure not to slip up and reveal her identity too soon whenever we're talking, because I'll say things like, "Yeah, don't worry, she'll find you guys someday." And like, wait, what? I'm like, who said that?
That's so cool. Also, hi Nick, and wow, that's
that does sound really cool, but I don't ever really get to do things like that because the stuff that I run, and a lot of the threats are like existential eldritch horrors. One of them doesn't even have a name. It doesn't have a name. It doesn't talk, and it barely exists within the reality. And I like it quite a bit. I have a friend who keeps joking that it just sounds like pop rocks in your mouth when you try to say its name. Which, like, fantastic. I love that for it.
Nice.
Like, I don't directly get to roleplay the evil characters, but what I do get to do is roleplay like how it interacts with the other characters and how it like interacts with the world. Like with this creature specifically that doesn't have a name and doesn't really exist within the world, its whole purpose is to try to like eat the existence of things. Partially so it can become more real. But like it has servants that I call tethers. That like it lives in the mind of and kind of like it does eat their existence within their home reality, but it uses part of its own existence to help them stay alive and help tether it to the reality. And so then you get to roleplay these people who still have like ghosts of their old personality and like
Oh, wow.
Ooh.
vague feelings, but it's all kind of muffled. And you see them kind of like struggle with it, and you get to see them try to like either break out or like lean into it, do whatever they want with it.
That's a really nice angle of going through
Yeah,
it.
that sounds pretty scary, especially if for example, if I know what they were like beforehand and just seeing them being like this. Plus, the word tether is pretty cool. It evokes a lot of strong feelings and imagery because they're tethered to. Yeah, I like it. That's nice.
The
Hmm.
fun thing is, if you knew them before, then all that you'd get from seeing them now would just be, haven't I seen you before? Even if they were like a brother or a best friend.
Oh my
Oh,
goodness.
whew.
That just got eaten.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's really that scary part of the unknown being just slightly off, not completely off, just slightly. The things you knew before.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of
Yeah.
something I've never run in D&D that some DMs will talk about called a false hydra. You know the classic hydra in mythology where if you cut off the head, perhaps a few more grow in place. But apparently, now I've never run this. It sounds a little involved, but there's a false hydra. Say you show up at a town, you're chatting with the nice barkeep there. Let's say their name is Thomas. You have a nice day. You go about do your business. They talk about maybe something feels off in the town. You go to sleep. The next day, you wake up. You go back to the town. You go back to the bar, and you're like, "Oh, where's Thomas at?" And everyone will say, "Thomas, what are you talking about?"
Oh my gosh.
So just to jump ahead, the false hydra, I believe, when it eats a character, all anyone's memories or connections with them cease to exist.
Oh.
So even though Thomas used to be there, I'm not quite sure how the story like closes in on itself to any holes in people's memory, how that works. But Thomas, for all intents and purposes, never existed.
Oh
So people
wow.
don't even know what you're talking about. But you all remember Thomas from yesterday, so it's strange. I believe that's how that works. I could be wrong, but that's just what that story reminded me of.
The
Yeah,
alternate
I love shit like that.
the alternate name is the gaslighting hydra.
Oh, actually, yeah, that makes sense. I know a lot of people use that phrase incorrectly, but I think in this instance, that's actually correct because you start questioning your own sanity, which I think is an important part of that phrase that people tend to forget. They just always call lying in general gaslighting, which I'm like, no, there's the difference.
Yeah. Let's say put this out here. Gaslighting is not just lying. Oh shit. Sorry, I dropped my cup.
Yeah. I love gaslighting players. No.
I mean, yeah, given what you run, it makes sense that it's something that you have to be good at and that you get more experience with it and that you're probably quite an expert at these days.
Yeah. Um, I just like watching people figure stuff out and then just like throwing a bunch of wrenches at them.
Yeah, that does sound fun. So I'm looking forward to potentially playing a campaign with you as a DM then. Well, both of you, really.
Yeah, I'm
um,
excited to check out some of that stuff that's going on and or have my character at least question what's going on in their lives.
okay,
Yeah.
I should ask, perhaps the final TTRPG question would be, what do both of yours advice for either starting players or DMs? Is there anything you'd like to sort of put out there to encourage people to like give it a go and just start doing it? Who would like to go first? Or like what resources you recommend? Yes, Max.
Gonna mull that one over.
Do you like me to go first?
If you have your answer ready, I'm sorry, I just need a like half a minute more, and then I'll be ready for an answer.
My answer is don't be afraid to pirate stuff if you
Oh,
don't know what you want to do.
Yar.
Which, you know, might not seem like the best advice, and like, yeah, go support the systems, but if you're like trying different systems out, I don't want to drop like $80 on a book I'm never gonna use.
That's a really good point. Like,
mhm.
most of the times you want to know what you're getting into Yar, before you sort of just, do it. So you have to be sure. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yar.
Yar.
Mhm. Okay,
Another point is don't be afraid to like break the systems. Don't be afraid to like build
true.
your own thing depending on what you want. Um, you can run pre-written things, but like a lot of the people that I know that wanted to be DMs or like tried to get into DMing are because they have their own stories that they want to tell. Um, and so I would just say look for mechanics that lend themselves to that.
Yeah, I agree with that one.
Yeah, I agree with that one too, especially when some of these systems have a lot of complicated mechanics or stuff that could be overwhelming, stuff that you don't even need if you want to tell your story.
Exactly. Like y'all said earlier, it's good to have the sort of system that works best with your premise and vice versa.
Yeah. And also, people looking into starting to play, do not expect your DMs to be like the DMs from Critical Role.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Those are like voice actors. They've got that rapport with each other. They're basically putting on the show that you don't expect. And the reverse is true. Don't expect your players, DMs, to be like the players on shows like Critical Role.
Hmm.
Yeah, 'cause, like I can't voice act to save my life. Um, and I'm not expecting anyone else to be able to do that, but if someone's going to come and be like, oh, why aren't you putting on a voice for this character? I can't do that.
Yeah, and that's absolutely fine.
um, like, if someone's going to play a campaign that I've done, they're also gonna have to kind of sit there and listen to me try to just info dump a bunch about whatever scene that they're in. There's a lot of me rambling because I can't voice act, but I can tell you what the person's voice is like. I
And
can't
there you go.
necessarily show you like pictures of the characters, but I can tell you what they look like. Um, I can try to like paint a scene just with telling you things. I have to have players that are willing to listen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think every DM needs to be able to voice act. Being able to describe either a scene or how a voice sounds is a skill in and of itself. And I know a few recent DMs, former players, now DMs, that also, voice acting isn't something that's necessarily in their wheelhouse. And even if I can't do a particular voice, my players will say, well, that's fine. Just talk normal. Like, not, I can't do a whole slew of accents, but that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. You could always say, "Oh, this person," which you've realized, they have a slight accent in there, but you just like let it know as a precursor, as opposed to always having to put it on.
Yeah, like um, I have one campaign that is entirely set in like a small town in Alabama. I cannot.
Right? Me
I
neither.
am Southern. I cannot do the
Ah.
Alabamian accent.
Mhm.
Like I can do a Southern drawl. I try not to on calls.
Mhm.
Like that's what I grew up around.
Mm.
Um, but like North Carolina, Alabama do not have the same accent. I cannot do that sort of accent.
Yeah, I feel that. Captain, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready to give my answer on. So to basically recap, the question was advice for people getting into TTRPGs, was it?
Yes. Either
Okay.
DMs or players.
Yes. So the most important thing that I can say is to, it might be a little difficult, but to find a really good group of people that applies to both the DMs that players are looking for, as well as the fellow players. So basically, the DM is a very important part of the session. So the fact that people, they might get a DM that doesn't mesh well with them, might cross boundaries, which I think is very important. I know that some DMs, including myself, actually have like these anonymous consent forms. So you can figure out what kind of stuff you can run or can't run, whether that involves stuff like spiders, snakes, racism, other issues that might apply. They have consent sheets online that you can give to your players, and they can anonymously send that in. And they can also like check a box if they prefer you follow up with them about a particular issue. There are some DMs that just cross all sorts of boundaries. There's some players that cross all sorts of boundaries. So it's important to find a DM that isn't going to do that and also won't put up with it at the table. Because even a group, like imagine you and like 3 of your friends get together, you kind of need one more person to fill that out. So maybe you'll grab one more person that you kind of know is like, oh, they're like a coworker of mine, or oh, we have the same class together. But you find out that they do a little bit maybe too much murder hoboing, or they kind of put your characters in awkward situations that are uncomfortable for the players themselves too, because that's an important part. Because if the players are uncomfortable, if the DM is comfortable, people aren't going to have a good time. So hopefully like really search hard for the right DM and the right players to make up your group. And sometimes things happen, sometimes players will leave, they'll get busy with life. Sometimes it'll be hard to get a session together, because that's the classic TTRPG meme. The real enemy isn't like the Minotaur or the dragon that you're fighting. The real enemy is scheduling issues, especially when you're coordinating with a group of 4, 5, 6 people. So yeah, just find the right people. I guess that's the number one thing that I'd tell. It might take a little bit longer to find your group. I know that there are online resources to try to go like, hey, looking for a group, kind of like you do for video games, right? It's like, oh, looking for a group to do Rocket League, to do CS:GO, to do Valorant with. A lot of people turn to those public forums to try to find players and DMs. I've had the luxury of having people that I know pretty closely to be my DMs and my players, so I thankfully haven't run into too many of those problems.
Yeah, that's a really
Yeah,
good advice.
go ahead.
Oh, that's all I was gonna say.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I agree with that. I didn't actually know that those are things, so I am going to use this in the future. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh yes, I can actually upload the document that I use in
Please.
Discord.
Oh,
I
that'd be
basically
fantastic.
I basically
That would be
adjust it
so
a little
helpful.
bit. Of course.
I had to disband my old group because there were people that were just crossing a lot of my boundaries in it.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Like specifically, there was this one girl that I met in like a class that wanted to join, and she, you know, pretty conservative. I didn't know that at the time.
Oh,
Um, and
I
like,
see.
it didn't work out.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah. Um, there was a specific conversation about like I do not know how it got onto the topic of like immigration in America. But, like it didn't. I Both of my parents are immigrants, and so it
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
just you know
Yeah.
didn't go great.
So, yeah, that'd really help a lot with stuff like that, Captain Troy. So we appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah,
Yes, I'll get that to you all. And it is a shame to have to play with players or DMs who, uh, like in that situation. I'm sorry you had to go through that.
Hmm.
it's fine. Things that happen when you're playing with people in the South.
Mm.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, valid concern.
Yeah.
As a Midwestern, I it's hard to find. I think people I could really connect to, but that's why I think it's really important that TTRPG could play. Of course, it's mostly a sort of it's sort of usually tabletop, like literally like physically together and stuff, but being able to play it online if you could like organize it right is also like really important to be able to do that for me, because that's personally how I was able to play maybe a year ago.
Yeah, exactly. And I learned how to DM online because it was in the middle of the pandemic.
Right,
Um,
same.
yeah.
Well, I'm glad that online has allowed us to. It sounds like we have like-minded people here, and at least the fact that we care about other people, which is surprisingly something, not necessarily that a lot of people believe in. So it's nice that the internet lets like-minded people come together and to role play and bear their heart out in the safe spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's like really most of the times you're just banding together and really saving, even if you can't do the world, you're like always there for each other, the party.
Yeah. Like, it shouldn't be so hard to find people who just want to play a game, but like sometimes it is. And the internet can help with that.
I also
Right.
like the one shots that you run because one shots in general are nice for people who might not be able to commit to a full campaign because campaigns can take upwards of a year or two or three. And for people who either have busy schedules, who are just getting into it for the first time, or just don't want to commit in general, being able to run the one shots basically a lot of times, at least in my experience, and I assume in yours as well, that the players afterwards will say, "Wow, that was really fun. Can we do more?" And it's a nice feeling, and just making all the one shots and running them through it, and it's a good time for everyone.
Yeah, I agree
Yeah.
with that.
Another reason that I do one shots is partially for me, so I don't like burn out with specific characters or concepts. And also, I don't think that like I personally am able to keep something horror focused scary for more than like a month.
Oh, you know what? That makes sense.
Yeah, that
I know that some people can. I just find that for me it works better in like 2 to 3 hour long sessions.
if you do, you'll have to be like Evil Dead, where you change your genres every movie.
Yeah,
You know, that makes sense. It's kind of like how there are a lot of shows or movies nowadays that I feel like, oh, this could have been like a movie, right? I'm like, oh, this could have been a show. Or a show, I'm like, ah, this could have been like a 4 episode thing, not a 12 episode thing.
Yeah.
So when it comes to certain
yeah,
things, if you're dragging it out, it doesn't really, you can't stay scary for long.
Hmm.
yeah. And like that's why I like exclusively do one shots for Call of Cthulhu, but I can run longer things in D&D
Hmm.
because when I do D&D, it's not like horror focused; it's more like fantasy focused. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
genres require sort of different handling, I think.
Exactly. Like people try to put and incorporate all sorts of other things into D&D. I mean, space D&D, that's cool and all, but there are space focused TTRPGs out there if you're looking for that kind of thing. Like when
Yeah.
it comes to, I forget if it's low or high fantasy. Sure, you can go to D&D, but when it's other stuff, you should, if it's futuristic, look into Shadowrun or something like that. Maybe not Shadowrun specifically because I hear it's a little complicated these days. But depending on what the vibe is, uh, what if it's futuristic or in the past, look into something else.
Hmm. Yeah. Alrighty then. Was there anything y'all wanted to shout out about yourself, or anything you think we should check out before we sign out for today? Whoever would like to go
Please
first.
play Fawning Over a Corpse. Please, please. if you're here and you haven't played Fawning Over a Corpse, it is a game that I and Trinket worked on together. I believe voting is still open for the jam, and I would like to win.
Yeah.
Please.
We
Yeah,
checked that out
definitely.
It would be good for
ourselves.
my self-esteem.
We checked that out ourselves on the channel here. It's about the main character and her fiance, Fawn. Actually, I should let you take it away. Ma.
It's about Donna and Fawn, who are fiancés, and they are just navigating on getting sick and what that does to their relationship and what that does to their livelihoods.
Mm-hmm.
It is horror.
It is horror. It's
Yeah.
amazing. Uh, I love it, and everyone who watched us do it will love it. So we know you'll love it. Check it out on HIO. The HIO. The voting has started. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll definitely check it out too.
Anything else you'd like to plug, Moth?
I am SugarCoatedMoth on Instagram if you want to go check that out. I don't post as much as I probably should, but I am there.
And Captain.
Okay. I'd like to make actually two plugs. One isn't necessarily for myself. It kind of aligns with what we were talking about before. Again, when we're playing as DMs or players, we're not all going to be like what you see on Critical Role as far as those professional voice actors are concerned. But they did turn one of their campaigns into an animated series on Prime Video. I believe it's rated a little bit on the mature side, but it gives a good viewpoint of what it feels like to be not necessarily playing D&D, but it's got like the vibes, it's got the atmosphere, it's got the stakes that you might see in a D&D campaign. So whether you're new to it or not, it was a good time to watch that first season. It made me want to play D&D as I was watching.
Ooh. What was it called again?
Oh, I don't think I even gave the name.
Oh.
It's called Critical Role: The Legend of Vox Machina.
Oh.
Yeah, it's basically their characters from their campaign that they used to stream on Twitch, voiced by the people themselves. So you know that it's going to be at least as accurate as you can get with an quote-unquote anime adaptation of, well, it's not a manga this time, but a D&D, a TTRPG stream. Set of streams, actually.
That's kind of crazy.
Mm-hmm. As far as my own stuff goes, I guess I'll just ask to plug my Twitch channel. I'm at twitch.tv/CaptainTroyHandsome. I run TTRPG stuff Wednesday nights at around 10:30 Eastern. So whether that's D&D or another TTRPG or maybe something like this. I feel like this counts. This has been a very fun TTRPG talk. I love interacting with people who are new to the scene, who have been on the scene a while, because I can learn from them, or vice versa, or even fellow DMs. So we can, they're just some things you can't understand unless you're a DM, and even if you've been a player like once or twice, there's just unique experiences to be had. So it was really fun being here. Thank you for the shout out. Yeah, we'll just we do TTRPG stuff on Wednesdays.
Yeah. All right. So Captain Troy on Wednesdays, Finding Over Corpse right now. Thank y'all so much. Anything else you'd like to say before we sign off?
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah.
Hope that you have a great rest of your day.
Yes, I hope you and the viewers at home have a great day. Thank you for having us. This was a really good talk. I enjoy talking about this kind of thing with good people. So this has been really nice. I was looking forward to it for a while.
Me too. Yeah, there will be a VOD. I am considering having an audio form. If people think that's a thing that would be interesting.